Everyone tells you the same thing. Just communicate more. Be honest about your feelings. Clarity fixes everything. So you do exactly that. You communicate. You explain. You reassure. You check in. You do everything right. And then one day, she disappears. No argument, no closure, no explanation, just silence. This is the part nobody warns you about, because the truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes the more you communicate, the less she wants you. Not because communication is bad, but because most people misunderstand what communication actually does to attraction. This story starts like many others. He wasn't careless. He wasn't distant. He wasn't emotionally unavailable. He was present. He replied on time. He explained his intentions. He reassured when she felt unsure. He talked things through instead of pulling away. He believed maturity meant transparency. And at first it worked. She appreciated it. She said she liked how open he was. She said he was different. That's usually how it begins. But slowly something shifted. Her replies shortened. Her energy changed. Plans became vague, and he noticed. So he did what he was taught to do. He communicated more. He asked if something was wrong. He clarified his feelings again. He reassured her once more. Each message felt logical, reasonable, respectful. But beneath the logic, something else was happening. Attraction wasn't being built. It was being dissolved. Here's the mistake most people never see. Communication solves confusion. It does not create desire. Desire lives in uncertainty. It grows in space. It needs tension to breathe. When communication turns into constant explanation, reassurance, and emotional checking, it removes the very thing attraction feeds on: mystery. The man didn't lose her because he was caring. He lost her because he replaced emotional tension with emotional availability. And emotional availability, when overdone, turns into emotional predictability. Predictability feels safe, but safety without polarity feels dull. This is where mainstream advice fails men. It treats attraction like a problem to be solved. But attraction isn't logical. It's biological. It responds to energy, not explanations. Every time he over-communicated, he thought he was strengthening connection. But what he was actually doing was signaling something else. I'm emotionally invested, and I need this to be stable. That need didn't come through in one message. It leaks slowly, through tone, through timing, through frequency. And women sense that before they can explain it. Ghosting didn't happen because she was cruel. It happened because her attraction quietly expired. An expired attraction doesn't argue. It leaves. The hardest part? She never planned to ghost him. She didn't wake up and decide to disappear. Her nervous system did. Because attraction doesn't fade loudly. It fades silently. When communication removes uncertainty, it also removes excitement. When every emotion is explained, nothing is felt. When every concern is verbalized, nothing is left to discover. The man became emotionally transparent. But transparency is not the same as magnetism. This is where Stoic psychology cuts through the noise. Stoicism teaches self-regulation before expression. Not silence, regulation. Meaning, you don't communicate to soothe anxiety. You communicate from stability. There's a difference. One builds respect. The other erodes it. The man wasn't wrong for caring, but he was wrong for turning communication into emotional insurance. Every "are we okay?" Every "I just want to be honest." Every "I feel like you're pulling away" wasn't neutral. It shifted the emotional balance. It told her, without words, my emotional state depends on your response. And once that message is felt, attraction starts to collapse. Because attraction requires autonomy. Two people choosing each other, not one person managing emotional certainty. Ghosting culture thrives on this imbalance. Because ghosting is not about cruelty. It's about avoidance. Avoidance of emotional responsibility. When someone feels pressured to reassure, they escape. Silence becomes relief, and relief is addictive. That's why ghosting hurts so deeply. It feels sudden, but it's never sudden. It's the end of a long process of over-communication replacing polarity. The man thought talking more would fix the distance, but distance wasn't the problem. Loss of tension was. Intention doesn't come back through words. It comes back through restraint. This episode is not saying don't communicate. It's saying don't communicate from fear, because fear sounds like need, and need suffocates desire. The man didn't need to disappear. He needed to stop over-explaining. He needed to stop chasing clarity. He needed to let uncertainty exist, because uncertainty is where attraction lives. And once uncertainty is gone, so is the spark. This is only the beginning of the story, because what he did next made everything worse. After she started pulling away, he did what most people do when they feel distance. He tried to close it. He replied faster. He explained more clearly. He reassured more often. Every message was well-intentioned, but intention doesn't matter when energy shifts. What changed wasn't the content of his messages. It was the frequency, the timing, the emotional weight behind them. At first, she still responded. Short replies, but polite. Neutral tone, but not cold. That gave him hope. So he leaned in a little more. And that's when the dynamic broke. Because attraction doesn't disappear when someone communicates. It disappears when communication becomes emotional maintenance. When every interaction is designed to stabilize the connection starts to feel fragile. And fragile things don't inspire desire. They create caution. She didn't feel chased in a dramatic way. She felt managed. Every message carried an invisible question. Are we okay? And when someone feels constantly asked that question, they start to feel responsible. Responsible for someone else's emotional balance. That's when attraction turns into obligation. Obligation doesn't argue. It escapes. This is why ghosting happens without warning. From the inside, it doesn't feel cruel. It feels like relief. Relief from emotional pressure. Relief from being needed. Relief from being the emotional center. The man never intended to create pressure. But pressure isn't created by force. It's created by repetition. Every clarification reduced mystery. Every reassurance removed tension. Every emotional check-in collapsed polarity. The relationship stopped being two people choosing each other. It became one person seeking certainty and one person providing it. That imbalance is subtle, but deadly. This is where mainstream advice gets it wrong. It treats communication as universally positive, as if more talking always equals more connection. But communication is a tool, and tools can build or destroy depending on how they're used. Communication that comes from clarity builds connection. Communication that comes from anxiety dissolves attraction. The man wasn't speaking from confidence. He was speaking from fear of loss. And fear always leaks. Not through words, through urgency. Urgency is felt even in calm messages, especially in calm messages. Because calm words with urgent timing create contradiction. The nervous system notices that contradiction instantly. She didn't consciously think, he's over-communicating. She felt something else. He's emotionally invested more than I am. And once that realization sets in, attraction shifts direction. Upward attraction requires equality. Downward attraction requires polarity. But when one person leans emotionally, polarity collapses. And without polarity, desire has nowhere to live. This is why the most confusing part for him was this. Nothing he said was wrong, but everything he said weakened his position. Because attraction isn't about being right. It's about being centered. The Stoic lesson here is brutal but liberating. You cannot use words to compensate for lack of inner stability. The moment communication becomes a way to regulate anxiety, it stops being communication. It becomes self-soothing through another person. And people feel that immediately. This is why silence often feels more powerful than explanation. Not because silence is a tactic, but because silence signals self-regulation. It says, I can sit with uncertainty without collapsing. That ability creates respect. Respect fuels attraction. The man didn't need to disappear. He needed to pause. Pause before sending the message. Pause before explaining. Pause before asking for reassurance. That pause would have kept the emotional balance intact. Instead, communication replaced mystery. And mystery is irreplaceable. Once gone, it doesn't come back through effort, only through distance. This is the part nobody prepares you for. Once someone feels you're emotionally predictable, they stop imagining you. And imagination is where desire lives. The man didn't lose her because he was boring. He lost her because he made everything known too soon. Nothing left to feel. Nothing left to wonder. Nothing left to chase. Ghosting wasn't the betrayal. Over-communication was the slow erosion that led there. And once ghosting happens, the instinct is to communicate even more, to demand answers, to seek closure. But closure is another illusion, because attraction doesn't end with reasons. It ends with perception. And perception doesn't change through words. It changes through behavior. The real lesson isn't talk less. It's stop using communication to manage fear. When communication comes from fullness, it attracts. When it comes from lack, it repels. This is where most people miss the turning point. They think the solution is better words, but the solution is better regulation. The man didn't need better sentences. He needed stronger emotional boundaries. Boundaries aren't walls. They're filters. They decide what gets shared and when. Without boundaries, communication becomes flooding, and flooded systems shut down. This is why she didn't explain. This is why she didn't argue. This is why she ghosted. Not because she didn't care, but because caring started to feel heavy. And heaviness kills desire. What happens next is the most important part. Because once communication fails, most people make one final mistake that destroys any remaining respect. And that mistake feels justified. When the ghosting finally happened, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt empty. No reply, no explanation, no final message, just silence. And silence is dangerous when you've been taught that communication fixes everything, because the instinct kicks in to send one last message, the closure text, the text that says, I just want to understand. I deserve honesty. Can we talk like adults? This is the final mistake, and it's the one that erases whatever respect was left. Because by this point, communication is no longer connection. It's negotiation. Negotiation for emotional relief. The man believed that clarity would heal the wound. But clarity doesn't heal attraction. It only soothes anxiety. And anxiety is not attractive. Here's the part most people refuse to accept. Once attraction is gone, explanation feels intrusive. Not helpful. Not mature. Intrusive. Because it asks someone to emotionally re-engage with something they've already let go of. Ghosting is avoidance. And avoidance is chosen when engagement feels costly. The final text doesn't bring answers. It confirms imbalance. It tells the other person, I'm still emotionally here. You're not. And I need something from you. That need is felt instantly. And once need is felt, respect cannot be restored through words. This is why Stoic philosophy emphasizes restraint at the moment of emotional peak. Not silence forever, but silence when emotion is loud. The Stoics understood that emotion narrows perspective. It convinces you that expression is necessary, urgent, justified. But urgency is the enemy of dignity. The man didn't lose her because he communicated. He lost her because he communicated from fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of not being chosen. Fear is human, but transmitting fear repels, because fear signals instability, and instability breaks attraction. The most painful truth of ghosting is this: silence is the answer. Not because it explains anything, but because it reveals the emotional reality. The absence of response is information, and chasing information only confirms the imbalance. This is where power quietly shifts. The moment you stop communicating, not out of anger, but out of self-respect, the dynamic stabilizes. Not the relationship, you. And that matters more. Because attraction can only return when respect is restored. And respect is restored through behavior, not words. Silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you refuse to beg for emotional presence. That refusal is felt, even if it's never acknowledged. The irony is cruel. The moment you stop trying to be understood, you become more respectable. Not because you vanished, but because you stopped leaking emotional need. This is why emotionally grounded people feel rare. They don't chase clarity. They accept reality. And acceptance feels powerful. This episode isn't telling you to shut down. It's telling you to know when communication turns into self-betrayal. When you explain past the point of dignity, you lose leverage. Not leverage over the person, leverage over yourself. And self-leverage is the only leverage that matters. The man learned too late, but the lesson was permanent. He stopped sending messages to feel better. He stopped explaining to feel safe. He stopped trying to manage outcomes. And something unexpected happened. His anxiety dropped. Not because she came back, but because he stopped abandoning himself. That's the real cost of overcommunication. It teaches you to ignore your own boundaries, to chase reassurance instead of stability. And stability is the foundation of attraction. The next relationship felt different because he didn't fill silence. He didn't over-explain. He didn't confuse honesty with emotional exposure. He communicated, but selectively. From calm, from clarity, from choice. And that changed everything. Not because communication was reduced, but because it was regulated. This is the final truth. Communication is not overrated. Unregulated communication is. When words come from fear, they push people away. When words come from stability, they pull people closer. And when silence comes from self-respect, it speaks louder than any explanation ever could. That's why the more you communicate, the less she wants you. When communication replaces emotional grounding, and the moment you understand that, you stop losing people to silence and start keeping yourself intact.